I got this call from a guy who said he was the CEO of an American television manufacturer. And I knew at the time there are no American television manufacturers. So I was like, really? You make televisions? And he's like, well, we don't actually make the televisions. So you market them? Well, we have an Omnicom company. Well, you do logistics? Well, UPS is actually. So what do you do?
Right.
And he cries. He cries in his office. He's like, we don't actually do anything.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. This is Brave New Work, a podcast about reinventing our organizations and the search for a more adaptive and human way of working. I'm Aaron Dignan, and I'm joined by my co-host Rodney Evans.
Hey everyone.
Today we are also joined by Douglas Rushkoff, the author of Team Human and professor of media studies at Queens College, and someone that has influenced my and our thinking greatly over the years. So Douglas, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be with you.
You know, here we are. On today's episode, we want to talk about society, the social and economic operating system, and what it all means and what the heck is going on out there right now in the midst of this panic and pandemic. But before we do that, we have to check in, because we check in at the beginning of every episode.
We have to, and we will.
Do.
Like we do.
Here we go.
Okay. So given that we are all staying home because we are responsible for the collective and we're not being idiots about that, I'm sure we're all fantasizing about where we're going to go when we get to leave our houses again. So my check-in round question for today is, where's your first trip going to be when we all rejoin the living? Aaron, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Doug.
It is crazy to me that in the space of just a month and change, the idea of getting on an airplane sounds so nuts to me, because I used to travel literally every week. Like I would be on an airplane all the time. My airplane status is disgusting. So I feel like, first of all, it sounds like a crazy question to me. Like, where would I go? I can't go anywhere. Where would I go? I would probably go. Normally the answer would be to New York, but I'm afraid that it's so riddled with pandemic. So I guess if it was clean, I would go back. Yeah, I'd go back to New York City, baby.
Back to New York. All right.
Yeah.
Douglas, what about you? Where are you going when the apocalypse has ended?
Well, I had tickets to the opening week of Patti LuPone and Company.
Yes, you did.
Amazing.
The first thing I'm gonna go to Broadway, go sit in the theater with people.
Nice. Yeah, no more social distancing. You guys can meet up on your New York trip.
We'll do it. Yeah, that sounds interesting.
I was supposed to be on vacation sometime that I think was last week, but feels like 4 months ago, in Palm Springs with my best friends. And that obviously got canceled. And so I'm really anxious to have that trip rescheduled and just to like be in the desert in a beautiful mid-century house, hanging out in Palm Springs. So
nice.
Hopefully by, I don't know, next year, we're all doing that.
I like the desert in the winter.
Yeah, it'll be great.
It's
going to be great whenever it happens, is the truth of it.
Yeah. It'll come around.
So Douglas, we are so excited to have you here to talk about, something as small as the future of the human race.
Yeah.
Let's just start with a little grounding about what's on your mind at this moment. As you think about where we are and what's happening to us as a people, what are you contemplating?
I guess I'm contemplating just slightly more extreme or urgent or obvious versions of stuff I've been contemplating all along, like the fragility and brittleness of a kind of global supply chain, the extent to which corporations have so efficiently extracted all value and autonomy from local people and places, in the name of, I guess, corporate growth. That
scale.
In the name of scale, that there's just so little distributed local competency. And I'm also really interested, I'm interested in the particular layer of competency that we in America and in elite America, I guess, have excelled in, but then all the areas of competency that we've left behind. It's like this one example keeps coming to me. Since the crisis, I've been getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails, more than the usual onslaught. And the two most common emails I'm getting are from people who either have or want to develop an app that will connect healthcare workers on the ground with people with supplies, right? Because they see on TV, as we all do, oh, I'm in an emergency room, I need masks. So everyone wants to make that app. Or people with 3D printers who are working on open source collective projects to do 3D printing of ventilators, mechanical ventilators, which we know are needed. And both of these widespread efforts, they are at a very particular level of production and creativity. What the ventilator people don't realize is that there were already close to 100 totally approved 3D printing and alternative ventilator models already online. The only problem is we need real factories to make them. That if you print out one part in 12 hours overnight,
that's not gonna get it done.
It doesn't do it. Or the people with the apps and all those apps, it's like, dude, there's a Google Doc that's already doing this just fine. You're just going to create confusion by creating competitive apps for all the same thing. So
right.
I feel like everyone's great at conceiving this thing and building an envisioned prototype, but there's so few people who can actually do anything. It's kind of shocking.
That makes so much sense. And it's funny, when you first said that, I was thinking even more basic about the fact that, like, yeah, we can develop software, but can we farm?
I know my daughter. It's great. I mean, I'm not supposed to talk about my kid or anything, but she, since the coronavirus thing started, she had to pick her electives for 10th grade.
Okay.
And she switched out of Latin and
hard pivot,
Middle East law, to sewing.
Yeah.
Agriculture. And it's just like, right, she gets it. I mean, she's not watching Walking Dead, but part of her understands that wouldn't it be cool to actually know how to do something?
Yes. Those skills are going to be so helpful for us.
Yeah.
I mean, they already would be, right? Like, we've gotten lazy about our vegetable garden. And then now we're having this moment where, even though where we live, the supply chain is still working reasonably well and we could get fresh things, we're like, wouldn't it be great if we could de-risk ourselves by not having
just
to
having
do that?
it here? Yeah.
I
We
know.
just have it here.
And it's
but
funny.
we don't, because we're lazy and we are knowledge workers.
Yep. I mean, there's a book I wrote. It must have been in 2001. Maybe 2002, called Get Back in the Box. And it was this business book I did for HarperCollins. And it was almost like sarcastically subtitled, like how being great at what you do is good for business. Because it just felt like every company was sort of following that Jack Welch model that let's get out of whatever sort of core competency we have and become a holding company.
Let's do everything.
Or do nothing. Let's outsource everything to either people in other places or to a piece of technology. And I guess because they realize that the closer you are to a bank, the more money you make, and the closer you are to a human being creating value, the less money you make. It's the old Jack Welch line about I figured out that I make less money investing in the manufacturing of a washing machine than I do lending money to someone to buy a washing machine.
Totally.
Yeah. But I was arguing then that if we stay in that trajectory, we're going to be screwed. When push comes to shove, it's a very kind of Warren Buffett attitude. It's really good if your company has some core competence, some expertise. So I was making these using a lot of case studies of like Ritz-Carlton and other companies that had sort of returned to competence. Like when Starbucks decided, hey, we're not making good coffee anymore. And they brought back the original CEO and he was like, okay, here's how you make coffee. Let's do that really well. That companies are going to have to kind of go back to that and pick, rather than weird values and top level this, what do we do? What do we know how to do? I mean, start with that.
Speaking of companies, I'm curious if you can connect the dots between what you were writing about in Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, which I feel like was really kind of originally targeting this extractive, kind of capitalist manifesto, with what's happening right now in the world around the pandemic and also around politics and the election. Like, I just feel like that was when we were in peacetime. And now we're in this really interesting crisis. And I'm just curious how you think it's going to accelerate or decelerate progress towards, the next way of working and being.
I mean, I feel like when Donald Trump started to talk about the apparent trade-off between the economy and our health, that he exposed something. He exposed something really, really much deeper than I think he intended to, which is that most human beings now are serving the economy. When we
With
were
life and limb.
with life and limb. We're serving the economy, and we're not serving the real economy of goods and services that people actually need. A lot of people now are realizing, look, I need food, I need shelter, I need these basic things. We'd like education, we'd like some health care, but all these guys who put on suits and go on the train into the city, what the heck are they doing?
You can curse on this podcast.
You can say
thank you.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It's like, what are they doing? How are they helping? What's going on? And we're coming to understand that most of us are going to work not because we're providing an essential good or service to someone, but we're trying to either market, in other words, convince people who don't need something that they do in order to grow a business, or somehow keep the economy growing, inflating. And that's to serve an operating system. And that's what I wrote about in Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, that beneath all of these tech companies, which may or may not be creating interesting goods and services. I mean, a lot of tech companies are doing things that are cool. I mean, we're on an interface now that's letting us record. They're giving us something. But this growth mandate that every company has to hit a home run, to become a unicorn or a multi-billion-dollar company, that's because of the underlying debt structure. That's because we live in an economy that since the 1200s has had a central currency that has to be paid back at interest. So companies have to grow to keep the economy going. And I think we're finally maybe either tired or creative enough to say, oh, wait a minute. You mean we don't have to use this crazy exponential math equation to direct every one of our businesses? No, you don't. You don't. You could just make money and reinvest it and be just fine, as long as you don't have this giant economy to support.
It's really interesting, too, that you talked about, who's really working for what. Because I just recently finished reading Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. And it was just really eye-opening to think about the fact that not only do they exist because of bureaucracy and sort of, corporate laziness, but they also literally exist as a sort of form of control and propping up and kind of keeping the system the way it is, which I hadn't really considered before. So it does feel like, some of the bullshit that's out there in terms of wasted effort and things that are too meta, it serves a purpose. It serves a very real purpose. It's just not the one that we think it does.
Right. And at the time, I mean, when a lot of this was implemented, it wasn't implemented nefariously. It wasn't, the Bilderberg Group thing. How are we going to control the masses?
Mustache twirling.
It really wasn't. It was, Franklin Delano Roosevelt looking at all these veterans who were going to come back. These traumatized World War II soldiers who are going to come back to America. How are we going to support them? And they came up with a smart idea, which is, let's create this sort of this infinitely expanding market. Stoke consumerism, which will create jobs for these guys to go into factories, give them mortgages so they don't go on strike, and they came up with a system that really worked from, the late 1940s right through really the Nixon era and a bit beyond. But, once you try to accelerate that growth, to kind of put it on digital steroids and have it grow to the point where you create these, multi-billion-dollar empires, then it really stops. It stopped working. You can only be asymptotic, for so long before things break down.
It is just like a virus, actually, in that way.
It is.
I saw a post from Adrienne Marie Brown this morning on Instagram that was a repost from something, but it was graffiti in some city that said, Corona is the virus, capitalism is the pandemic. Which, I thought that was artistic and also true. And so what I'm wondering about in this moment is if we can align on the idea that capitalism as we know it has outlived the purpose that you just described. What can we be doing right now to ensure that we don't just recreate and keep feeding that system when the virus has subsided?
And can we be very precise about what kind of capitalism we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is capitalism and capitalists are very sensitive to efforts to abolish them, right? So we shouldn't. I don't think like we should talk about capitalism as the problem, but the sort of a capitalist monoculture as the problem. So it's great. Some companies will need to be capitalized. That's great. Uncle Vinny wants to start a pizzeria. He needs $20,000 for an oven. Let's invest. And Vinny, you should, either this is either a convertible debt structure or, I'll explain to him or I have a share in your pizzeria. And that's fine, and I'm happy. Maybe I get a perpetual share for doing that, or maybe not. But we'll organize that. That's real. But not the business. Just because it borrowed money once or had investors once doesn't mean it's in hock to the mob forever. Right, which is the way we've set it up now. So you start a company, the minute you go public, now you've got shareholders who demand growth no matter what, which is why, and I went to a big Pepsi shareholder meeting, thanks to you, Aaron, actually, that's how they found me. And I saw the CEO or the head of something of the company was in front of all the vice presidents at this big meeting in Barcelona, and they were shouting 4.3, which was the percent growth target they had for the year. And I got up to do my talk and I was like, dudes, if you're one of the 50 biggest companies in the world, if you need to grow by 4.3% in order for everything to be okay, then we are really fucked, right? This is not working. So it's balancing that then and saying, well, is this a business that needs to grow forever, or is there any right size for this business? Is there a place that we can get to? And then if we are going to be a right size business, is there a way for us to be okay with the amount of income we're getting? And how do you structure a business to do that? And that's what I think people are going to be looking at, partly because they're tired. They want to spend time with their kids. Can I just make $10 million? Is that enough? 30 million, 50 million, what's enough, and what's enough for the company? If we make $30 million profit a year, do we need to increase that, or can we just innovate from within to sustain our size and profit level?
So interesting. It's the fight I get in most often on Twitter is the fight with folks that are like, if you, eliminate the billionaire class, why would anyone start a company? And I'm just like, I don't know how much money. It is insane. It is.
How much money does a person need?
Yeah, that's the point, right? And it's sort of like, well, they did this amazing thing. They should reap the spoils of that amazing thing. And
what are the spoils? But what are the spoils? It's like they should reap the spoils. They should have 100 19-year-old women in a harem, right? That's the spoils. What do you mean? Why would I start a company if I don't get 119-year-old girls in a harem? What's the point?
It's unbelievable.
That's what the $1 billion is, though. It's just perverse. It's just money that could be doing something. And the smart ones realized way too late, oh my gosh, I have 99% too much money. Now I'm going to figure out a way to try to shove it back in the economy where I think it's going to do the best.
They get to look like a god twice in that scenario.
Right.
Once for building the big thing and getting so rich, and then once for realizing that they need to be benevolent. My favorite quote is from Ricardo Semler, who says, if you have enough to give money at the end, then you took too much. Right. And I really think that's interesting, which makes me always question, how much is enough. But I am curious, can you talk a little bit about, you talked about the money could be doing something. Can you talk about trapped money and parked money for a second and the role that plays?
Well, I mean, the way I look at money is trapped in share price, that partly because of our tax structure, that capital gains are taxed low and income is taxed high. There's an incentive for the wealthy to have their share price increase. And share price money is, as far as I'm concerned, is money that's trapped. So when I look at digital companies or most new companies, I look at them as kind of software that's developed to suck money out of the real economy and trap it in share price. So like that's what Uber is. More than it's connecting drivers with riders, it's taking money out of the economy and shoving it into share price. And it's a non-circulatory way to look at money. And I understand it's the way businesses look at money is, how do I earn $10 once rather than how do I earn $1 10 times? If you earn $1 10 times, it's because that money is circulated through the economy again and again and again and again. And that's the kind of $10 that you want. The thing I always tell companies is, make everyone rich. And that's the part they don't quite understand, because they're still in the sort of balance sheet of Renaissance Europe mentality of credit and debit. What you want is your customers to be rich. Why? So they can spend more money with you. You want your suppliers to be rich. So you don't look at them like Walmart does. How much can we squeeze them? In this sort of vampiric way that ultimately pushes them out of business. Rather, how could we give them deals so that they come back and love working with us? And once you start looking at it, it's not spiritual. It's actual math.
Right.
The more money there is in your marketplace, the more money there is for you.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about this sort of growth at any cost, extractive way of being, what do you think that does to innovation?
Well, it does a bunch of things. It puts companies in kind of the rearview mirror as far as innovation. It makes them depend more on data and past results, less willing to take risks, and more secretive is the real thing. So just like they're storing their money and locking it up in a vault, they're taking their innovations and putting them in black boxes and preventing anyone from seeing them, because they become afraid that their best innovations are in the past.
Yeah.
And that's really sad. What I tell companies to do, and even companies like Procter & Gamble do this, is like open source every friggin' technology thing that you came up with. And what does that communicate to the world? It communicates that we are so good. We are so confident in our abilities. We're going to share everything we're doing at the moment we've done it, because we're so much better than you. That we're going to come up with the next thing, and we know how to use this better than you do. So here's everything we did.
Yeah.
Anything that you can do to contribute to that knowledge base is only going to serve us, because we're the smartest ones.
I actually think that insecurity is at the root of a lot of this, because it does boil down to the idea that, like, yeah, if you want to have money flow and you want to have ideas flow, then you need to believe that you're still going to be in business in 2 years or 10 years, and that you're still going to be producing your best work. And what I find is that instead, the underlying ethos is, let's get out of this thing. Let's sell. Let's go public. Let's cash out. Let's like, everybody kind of is looking for like the big windfall that they
literally
can then
it's
trap.
the exit.
Yeah,
literally, it's like,
literally
where's our
exit? Yeah, how do we get out of this economy
that's part
with
of
our
what,
trappings?
Right, that's part of what digital did, though. Digital. This is some of the stuff I was writing about way early on in like media virus and all, is that digital tends to make us go meta on things. The sort of postmodern sort of, when you go meta, means like you kind of pull out and you no longer look at the business, but you kind of are thinking about the business of the business. Or you don't buy shares, you buy derivatives or derivatives of derivatives. You keep going meta. You keep going to the next abstract level. So it's really hard when you're in that kind of society, in that kind of framework. It's hard to think about the actual business you're in as the business you're in. You tend to think of the business you're in as the thing that you're going to sell. And then once you sell enough businesses, then you go, now I'm going to sell a business that buys and sells businesses.
Right.
And
I'm going to be an
so
investor.
on and so on.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that, because I think in the work that we do, which you're really familiar with, is we often are trying to get our clients, who are very, very large clients, to, at a minimum, acknowledge who the customer is and how they're delivering value to the customer. But I think another way of saying that is to be able to ground in the idea of, like, what do you actually make? Like, what is your business of the business? I love that question. I think it's really valuable, because because the conversation does get extrapolated a lot of layers away from that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I got this call. It was what motivated that first book. Get Back in the Box. I got this call from a guy who said he was a CEO of an American television manufacturer and wanted advice on getting out of the box with their communication strategy. And I knew at the time there are no American television manufacturers. So I was like, really? You make televisions? And he's like, well, we don't actually make the televisions. And I'm like, oh, so you design the televisions? No, well, we don't really do that. So you market them? Well, we have an Omnicom company. Well, you do logistics? Well, UPS is actually. So what do you do?
Right.
What do you do? And I end up meeting with this guy and he cries. He cries in his office. He's like, we don't actually do anything. And I don't mean to tease him, but he was weeping. And I was like, it's okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's a TV. Do you know anybody? Is there anybody here who knows about TVs? It's like, I think Morris. Over in whatever the marketing legis or whatever. I think he bring in Morris. So Morris comes in. It's like, yeah, I used to work at Zenith. We had real TVs. How do they work? So just to start find one person in your company who knows something about what your company supposedly does and start from there. But it changes the priorities, and I think we're going to see that now as people from my daughter on up are realizing that knowing how to do something might be cool. If we start with that, then we think of the org chart of the company as much more of a mandala with the super competent people at the middle, and then everybody is serving those little geniuses, those little skunkworks people, the true geeks and nerds of what you do, whether you're making cement or making transistor radios. I guess no one does that anymore. But whatever you're doing, those are the stars. That's the social and business and competence heart of what you're doing, and it becomes the culture of your company. And some have done that. I mean, Apple had that for a while when, the cult of Steve was making Macs in that separate building. It was a little crazy, but at least it had that, it seemed to value the maker rather than just the marketer or the spreadsheet.
I think it's become the culture of the culture, too, because if you look around, the sort of death of expertise and the death of science has been a death of not really, knowing how things work and how things get made and how things actually get done. And you see people, questioning epidemiologists on social media and then turning around and watching Netflix. And
Right.
It's like, what makes that work, right? A whole bunch of science.
Yeah, but we have a president who was raised in the church of Norman Vincent Peale. Literally, from the time he was 6 years old, he was listening to Norman Vincent Peale. He's the guy who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, and it's a very American idea that just think and grow rich. It's what's behind the secret. This is it. You just you
just got to believe.
You just got to believe, and believing is part of it. But you kind of also need some bricks between that mortar of belief. The belief is your value system that can help guide, what you learn to do. But you still, it should be used to energize actual functioning rather than just using it as an excuse to ignore people who actually know something.
Of
So
course.
I'm curious.
Intuition should not be the enemy of data.
It
And yet
shouldn't.
so often
It
is.
really shouldn't. But without any data, it's hard to intuit much.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, speaking of the power of positive thinking, coming out of the pandemic that we're in right now,
We're coming out of it?
I'm saying let's cast ahead. Let's
Someday.
cast ahead. Let's
Someday.
imagine.
We're gonna.
Let's imagine that someday we get our shit together. Who is likely to succeed? Do you think the winners and losers are going to fall across lines that you're comfortable with, or do you think it's going to get better, worse? I'm just curious who you think is going to kind of come on the other side of this in a beneficial position, and whether that tells a story that we like or don't like.
Well, the losers are going to be the people who've been losing all along. I mean, our society was built. So you see it, like people in jail are the worst. Immigrants are the second worst. people south of the equator are going to be bad, and then everywhere else it'll be brown people, and women. It's the same order of things will dictate where we fall on the spectrum of winning and losing. On the more positive side, I feel like we will have winners in some of the more distributed businesses. I feel like, and maybe this is, I don't know if this is insane, but small farmers, indigenous people who still have some connection to their own land, wise people who can help people make. I think sense makers are gonna be valuable because it's a real discontinuity. This is like another Kennedy assassination or 9/11. So people who can make sense, but so like the elders who are still articulate about sense making, and farmers, educators. I mean, some of the people that we would want to see come through. I mean, just as the firefighters came through 9/11 as heroes, I think healthcare workers are going to come through this as heroes. And maybe the healthcare workers will have some strong suggestions on the future of healthcare policy. And I do think that we will necessarily see some of the value in more distributed solutions and the vulnerability that these very brittle centralized solutions have conferred on us. So the winners, I hope, will be people in small to medium-sized businesses, if that's still a term that's used,
right.
SMEs or whatever those are, who are actually making things in real places. We make windows, we make carburetors. Do cars have carburetors? Probably not. I don't know what they use, but people who are places where are making things in slightly less global, disconnected ways.
That's awesome. I hope so too. And if everyone buys a gift card from your local restaurant, we might have some of those too still
there
left.
You go. Exactly.
So Douglas, final question. And this one is a selfish question, actually, at least selfish in service of our purpose. I'm curious, you know what we do. Is there anything you think we should be doing differently or focusing on or thinking about going into the next, 6 months to a year? If you were to sort of sit down with us and redirect us a little bit, do we just keep doing what we've been doing, or do we lean into, some particular direction here?
I'm afraid of leaning in because the woman is really bad who said that. I think she corrupted poor little Mark Zuckerberg, who would have been good otherwise.
Interesting.
Maybe. Although the other guy, what was his name? The Napster guy?
Yeah, Sean.
Oh, Sean.
Sean wasn't good, and Peter Thiel probably wasn't a good influence
maybe
either.
Just not. Maybe the cast of characters.
He really picked the wrong people. If he had picked like me and you and even Evan Williams or something, it really would be different. And he'd only have 100 million or something. Poor thing. But the world would be so much better. I think that the next opportunity, and I don't know how you do this, is much smaller businesses needing your help. If there's a way to create a product like, how Seth Godin does this like alternate MBA, and hundreds of people take this thing and they spend maybe $1,000 a piece. He still makes $100,000 for a month of work, but it's directed at these tiny business. So I think the emails I'm getting, and it's not serviceable, are from I have a music store, I have a pizzeria, I'm baking bread, and all those people really need some help in how to navigate a successful course, through these choppy waters. And if the Ready could help apply these things, I know you wrote the book, and that should be of help, but even the scale of the examples in the book aren't
still too big.
It's big.
Yeah, they're not readily. I mean, I can translate them, but I think it's, that's because I think in this space all the time. But I think it's hard for people who are just, I'm fixing vacuum cleaners. It's hard for them to quite understand. And those are the people we need to help. Those are the businesses that are going to increase the resilience that we need. So if there's a way to help them become as ready as we want to make GE, that would be a great service and potentially profitable.
Well, it's very exciting to hear you say that, because there's good news in the works over at the Ready. So we'll more on that in a future announcement.
Well, I hope you invite me to play too. I still have access to part of your Slack.
We'll run some things by you as they mature, if that offer stands.
All right, great. No, because that way you can use this podcast to say, if you come to the Ready, you get access to people like Rushkoff.
That's true.
There you go.
That's true. Get a little Rushkoff in your life.
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty good place to dial things back and shut it down. So, Douglas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for being on the right side of the ethical law.
And hey, everyone, if you could do us a solid like Natalie did and write us a review, which she also sent to me, which I continue to love reading, that would be amazing. We appreciate it. Y'all are helping us reach larger and larger audiences every week, which is so, so, so great. So thank you.
And as always, a quick tip of the hat to Taylor Marvin for making us sound good. Brave New Work is produced by The Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. You can get in touch with us by emailing podcast@theready.com. And as for you, thanks for listening. Now go change something.